So it is a pleasure to have Mrs. Ishi Khosla with us. May I basically request Madam Ishi Khosla to please take charge and share your views about nutrition and how critical and important it is to maintain good health. Ishi Khosla, please.
It is indeed a privilege and an honor to be here today on such a special occasion in the memory of Dr. K.K. Agarwal, a stalwart in his field, and of course, on a special day, which is Teachers' Day. And what a better way to pay tribute to this tall man who is an embodiment of a guru in himself. He made it his mission to teach and to dispel darkness among the community. So very appropriate, the lighthouse, remembering Dr. K.K. Agarwal. It is still going to take time to accept his loss, but I am really privileged to be here, and I'd like to thank the organizers, Eris, Mr. Lester, Mr. D'Souza, the family, Dr. Veena Agarwal, Nilesh and Naina, for giving me this opportunity today to speak to you all about something which Dr. K.K. Agarwal firmly believed in, the power of food and nutrition. So I'm actually so thrilled to be here and addressing such a distinguished audience. COVID in the last 1.5 years has indeed changed the world in ways which perhaps we could never imagine. Physically, mentally, politically, economically, so on and so forth. While the pandemic was going on, we couldn't help but understand or observe why certain people were getting infected, certain people were dying. Despite precautions, despite vaccinations, there were people who were dying. All of this was obviously for me, as a practitioner and a healthcare provider, it seemed to me something to think about. You can't ignore the fact that in a family, if 5 people are there, 4 are infected and 1 is not. People who had no business to pass away had fatal outcomes. So what was the difference? And I will share with you in my immediate family, friends, patients, there were doctors who had, of course, not got any vaccination. They were treating ICU patients of COVID. And they had no problem. They are absolutely okay. There are 2 in my mind I'm referring to right now. And they are COVID warriors, day in and day out. They are young doctors who are also my patients and following a diet which is what we call an anti-inflammatory diet. In my own home, we had 3 people out of 12 who had COVID for reasons because of travel. But the others managed to be all right. And despite close contact, despite being in the same room, sleeping in the same room, what was the difference? I have patients who have told me, my patients who are following an anti-inflammatory diet, ma'am, everybody got it. I don't know why I didn't get it. and so on and so forth. So the critical word here is perhaps inflammation. And I use the word perhaps, but as we go along, you'll understand that that is a game changer. According to research, 94% of fatal outcomes of COVID-19 across the globe patients have had one or more comorbidity. It could be obesity, heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, etc., etc. Which means that only 6% actually died of COVID per se. So what is the common thread again in comorbidities? When we talk of obesity, when we talk of diabetes and IBD, etc., what are the common links in these conditions? Singly, inflammation, the one common factor. And today, we know all diseases begin with inflammation. All means all. Whether it's cancer, whether it's autoimmunity, whether it's diabetes, heart disease, all of these, starting point is in inflammation, which is uncontrolled. So I'm not going to spend too much time just talking about inflammation, because that I'm sure you all are aware of as an audience. So let's spend the next half an hour in understanding what aspects of diet, besides inflammation, affect our immunity, and what we can do and how we need to change the way we think about our bodies and how we think about immunity, and where is this inflammation coming from. So, I think we have all been through this. A man with his health has 1,000 dreams, but take away his health and he has only one dream. Well, as an audience, I don't need to spend time on what is innate immunity and what is adaptive immunity. How can we affect or impact our immunity through diet? Some of the key areas include good nutrients, which means proteins, good fats, the right kind of carbohydrates, antioxidants for building and replenishing the immune cells, managing inflammation, and I will talk about it in the coming few slides, gut health and digestion. And when I say gut health and digestion, I will explain what I mean, also to do with food sensitivities, as they just introduced me with wheat, as is wheat killing you. One of the key areas of concern is increasing numbers of individuals suffering from this. Weight and waste, which means insulin metabolism and carbohydrate intake, immunity through the life course. And when I say immunity through the life course, I refer to the starting point of the building of the immune system right from the womb to the early years. So whether the pregnancy was healthy, whether there was breastfeeding and all of those early years. So that helps to build the innate immunity. So immune system demands for energy and nutrients can be met from exogenous sources, which is the diet sources, and when that is inadequate, endogenous sources such as body stores. Some micronutrients and dietary components have very specific roles in the development and maintenance of an effective immune system throughout life. So I'll discuss each of those points that we had, beginning with nutrients. I've already told you the importance of adequate protein and good fats, healthy fats, which have always been neglected and been taken in the negative rather than the positive. So good fats, proteins, and good carbohydrates. So I won't spend time talking about that, but let's look at the micronutrients. Micronutrients include vitamin A, vitamin B, C, D, E, zinc, magnesium and calcium, glutamine, selenium, glutathione, and NAC. And others, of course, I have just listed out. And among the non-nutrients include fiber and good hydration. So let's discuss vitamin D. I think so much has been said about vitamin D, and this pandemic, thankfully, every medical prescription had a prescription for this. I'm glad it has come of age, and it was really the hero. And I think I would like to enumerate, because it's a medical audience, on the modes of action of vitamin D. The vitamin D receptor, VDR, is a nuclear receptor that can directly affect gene expression. The presence of VDR in the majority of immune cells immediately suggests an important role for this micronutrient in the immune cell activities. It's one of the most powerful anti-inflammatory vitamins. It goes beyond just being a vitamin. It inhibits Th17 and Th1 response and promotes TREGs. It impairs B cells and development and function. It stimulates antimicrobial peptides from immune cells, affects microbiota composition and gut barrier. A recent study indicated that patients hospitalized with COVID-19 who had sufficient levels of vitamin D had decreased risk of adverse outcomes and death. And this is actually true in many studies. Levels less than 19 nanograms in ICUs, all of those patients died. And between, I don't have that slide here, but 20 to 35, there were mixed outcomes, and above 40 nanograms, all survived. So you can imagine how critical this vitamin is, and I'm glad we are addressing it. And mind you, vitamin D is a sunshine vitamin, and in a country like India, we have no dearth of sunshine. And yet, we are facing this epidemic of deficiency of vitamin D. Vitamin C, premier antioxidant nutrient in the body. It regenerates two important antioxidants, vitamin E and glutathione. Without vitamin C, the protective mechanisms can break down. The role of mega doses are critical during infection. High levels and doses between 500 to 2000 daily are recommended. Zinc, of course, is one of the most important micronutrients in the immune system, which showed it inhibits viral replication. It has anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. Zinc deficiency is related to enhanced IL-6 and production, and thereby translating to a pronounced inflammatory response. It has a role as a cofactor with both catalytic and structural roles in many proteins. Even a mild deficiency of zinc has been associated with widespread defects in both the adaptive and the innate response. Ionophores, well, this is something which is really a carrier of zinc to the cells, and we know now that quinine, hydroxychloroquine, and quercetin, which is found in onions and certain wines and certain other vegetables, help to transport zinc into the cells. So they are called ionophores. So therefore they help in the zinc transportation. Anything between 15 to 50 milligrams is good. Magnesium activates vitamin D in the body, and this is again a very neglected mineral. We all focus on calcium, but somehow magnesium has been left and unrecognized. One of the reasons is that blood levels are not indicative of cellular levels. So a simple blood work will not reflect the true status. And like so many nutrients that we've talked about, and maybe things like vitamin B12 and iron, which we are seeing as deficiencies rampantly today, this is one of those unrecognized minerals, which also actually needs to be given with calcium. A lot of prescriptions are giving calcium 500, calcium 1000, but in the absence of magnesium, actually calcium can be counterproductive. So, and the signs and symptoms of magnesium are very, deficiency are very common, and magnesium is basically again one of those probably the absorption, it's a malabsorbed vitamin like the others we've spoken about despite good diet. So it's difficult to document the deficiency, but we know in clinical practice it is critical, and it has over 300 functions in the body, including very important for diabetes management and obesity. So people who complain of constipation, for stress, of aches and pains, headaches, very commonly get better just by giving magnesium supplements in combination with calcium. And they have to be given, like a ratio of calcium to magnesium should be 2:1. So a low magnesium can lead to cytokine storm, during which the body attacks its own cells and tissues instead of fighting the infection. This creates inflammation, cells and tissue damage, narrowed blood vessels and blood clots. And there are studies to document the issue, this whole area. So I'm not going to spend more time talking about it. So these are the critical nutrients, and there are, of course, so many others, but since I'm not going to talk about them, they are not less important, but they are better understood. Phytonutrients are non-nutrients. There are no vitamins, they are not minerals, they are not antioxidants, but they are just compounds in plant food which go beyond their nutritional benefits. These are phytonutrients, the colors, the flavors in foods, in vegetables, and these are extremely powerful modulators of the immune system and our health. And how? By modulating gene expression. They are the messengers. They are the information carriers. Which gene will be silenced and which gene will be expressed. So don't consider, just because they are not vitamins, just because they are not minerals and nutrients, this area of conversation in diet is extremely critical. And phytonutrients come from plant foods, all the brightly colored vegetables and fruits, all the spices, the good natural fats. They are about thousands and thousands have been discovered, and new ones are being discovered. So phytonutrients, they have what we call polyphenols, which can be anti-inflammatory and immunomodulatory, more important than vitamins. And the way to get adequate levels of these phytonutrients, we all talk about healthy diet and we picture vegetables and fruits. That's the way to get them into your diet, besides all the colorful spices and the teas and all the other foods that we have which are rich in these compounds. And a half plate rule simply means that if your plate is half full of these vegetables and fruits, there are good chances that you are making up the adequate amounts of these foods. I will talk a little later in terms of actionable strategies of how to go about it. So we have spoken about the critical nutrients. Let's look at inflammation. I don't need to explain what is unregulated and excess inflammation in the body and what it can do. So basically, I have divided the 3 nutrients. Where does the inflammation come from? Let's look at carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Carbohydrates can be pro-inflammatory if you have too much of carbohydrate because of insulin or exaggerated insulin response, what we call insulin resistance, and too much of sugar and high glycemic index foods. Proteins, certain proteins like milk protein and gluten, we've talked about the protein in wheat, and excessive quantities of animal protein or processed meats can be pro-inflammatory. And among the fats, natural fats are anti-inflammatory, but excessive quantities of polyunsaturated fats, which are natural also, can be pro-inflammatory. More than 7% in the diet of polyunsaturated fats, which include things like sunflower oil, corn oil, and kardi oil, soya oil. High intake of these oils can be pro-inflammatory. And the most pro-inflammatory molecule in our diets is trans fats. Trans fats, I think the understanding is far more today than when I started practice in 94. They are now being also part of packaging. They have to be declared on the food labels. Trans fats are nothing but compounds which are made when fats are heated to high temperatures, and when they make margarine from liquid vegetable oils. So the process of hydrogenation creates trans fats. The process of excessive heating of any fat will create trans fats, and these are highly inflammatory fats which have been linked to heart disease and today to insulin resistance and inflammation across the body. Earlier their association was limited to heart disease, but today it's inflammation in general. And let's just look at how this simple trans fat laden food comes to our table. The morning cup of tea, the chai and biscuit. That biscuit is picked up from the shelf. Companies use margarine and vanaspati to make these biscuits because these hydrogenated fats actually have a longer shelf life. So if you have ever made a cookie at home, anybody listening has made a cookie at home, it will last you about a week, 10 days, maximum 2 weeks. And it gets rancid. So natural butter or ghee will not give the food an extended shelf life. But these fats can take the shelf life from 2 months to 3 months. You know those biscuits are sitting on the shelf for months, nothing happens to them. So whatever commercially prepared bakery foods that you use, whatever fried food that you buy from outside which is using reused oil, will be laden with trans fat. So the morning cup of tea, which most, I'm afraid I have to say this, that a lot of my patients say that the doctor has said, we cannot have tea empty stomach, we have to have that biscuit. And I said, no, I'm sorry, you have to, if you do not take the tea empty stomach, then take something healthy, take some soaked nuts, take a fig, take a date, take few raisins. But these are non-negotiable. There is no room or zero tolerance for these fats in our diet. And certain countries in the world have actually become trans fat free, including Denmark, Canada, New York, and other parts of US. So this is a conversation which is very important, and we've talked about all the, so these are the pro-inflammatory components in the nutrient scenario. Then we have pro-inflammatory components in terms of all the pesticides, the preservatives, the chemicals, the various names that you see on the back of packs which you don't understand are all chemicals and are all pro-inflammatory. All the medicines, the antibiotics and the other, the painkillers, etc., will cause inflammation in the body. I mean, I'm not talking of, not having anything, don't misinterpret this, but these are, all the chemicals will induce some form of inflammation. And stress, lifestyle also would mean stress. Stress can also trigger inflammation. So let's not go there. Let's just stick to the nutritional aspects. And this is a relatively new area of conversation, and perhaps I am discussing it only of late, which is the role of nitric oxide. And why I have brought this up is because the nasal vaccine which is coming up is is using this NO, and the role of nitric oxide in immunity, I'm sure you all understand it with the nitroglycerins and the other medicines that are used to boost nitric oxide. But in the diet, there are ways of increasing nitric oxide, which include a diet which is high in nitrates, particularly beetroots. Beetroots and greens are very high on nitric oxide. And L-arginine and L-citrulline supplements can also boost the nitric oxide in the blood. And of course, pranayam now has been found to be increasing nitric oxide in our respiratory tract. So we spoke about the pro-inflammatory aspects of fats, and now there is an anti-inflammatory fat. This, I'm sure, today also has assumed importance, and people are aware of this omega-3, the fish oil capsules, etc., etc. So it is one of the most powerful anti-inflammatory component of our diets. Unfortunately, N3 and N6. These are polyunsaturated. Omega-3 fats are a part of the PUFA or the polyunsaturated fats, which I just spoke about. But the ratio between the N3 and N6 is very important. I mentioned N6 are pro-inflammatory, N3 are anti-inflammatory. So too much of N6 is counterproductive. N3 is which is omega-3, we need to boost. So the ratio should be ideally equal, or maybe 2:1, as close to each other as possible. But according to researchers, Indians particularly have a very poor N3-N6 ratio. 1:200, 1:400, it's very, very dismal. And perhaps there are many reasons for this, the changes in the diet that we've had in the past 50 years, and we have abandoned a lot of traditional wisdom and traditional practices and, taken away the good fats and replaced them with pro-inflammatory fats and the whole processed food, etc., etc. So the role of bringing back the right ratios by bringing back foods which are rich in omega-3 fats is critical to inflammation and thereby immunity and thereby overall health. So fish, of course, is one of the important sources or carriers of this fat. All the fatty fish, the higher the fat content, the better. And then in the vegetarian world, there are flax seeds and chia seeds. We have mustard seeds, sesame seeds, green leafy vegetables, once again, soya beans, bajra, rajma, chana, methi, and rice seeds. So these are some of the sources, and there are other sources as well, but these are very common foods which can be consumed. And today I think a lot of people are consuming fish, either fish or oil capsules, or chia seeds and flax seeds have come of age. So these fats were actually discovered when they found that the Eskimos who ate almost 60% fatty diet had zero incidence of cardiovascular disease, depression, and arthritis. And then the link was made with inflammation. And these same Eskimos, when they moved to mainlands, suffered the same prevalence of these diseases. And it's been about 30, 40 years now. So just a list of certain anti-inflammatory foods: cold-pressed oils, extra virgin coconut oil, extra virgin olive oil, sesame oil, mustard oil. Mustard is loaded with omega-3. We run after the olive oil, of course it's wonderful, but our own mustard oil also has good percentage of monounsaturated fat, which is very healthy, and loaded with the omega-3 fats. Turmeric, ginger, spices, giloy, aloe vera, probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics. Boswellia serrata is a herb, teas, flavonoids, and phytochemicals. I just mentioned all the vegetables and fruits and the polyphenols. These are all anti-inflammatory foods. And now let's begin our conversation on gut health. And that's where inflammation actually begins. It begins with dysbiosis. And we are understanding the role of the gut in our overall health and well-being today, scientifically. But Hippocrates probably knew it 2,500 years ago. 2,500 years ago, a man said all diseases begin in the gut. But we didn't understand it. We still did our practice. If the virus is in the lung, we just focused on the lung. But the battle actually is beginning in the gut. It sounds strange to a medical practitioner, but it's a fact. Whether it's asthma, whether it's any kind of respiratory disease, an allergy, brain disease, depression, today we can link it all with the gut. And that is what I'm going to just explain how. Let's look at the immune system. The largest immune organ is the gut. Gut-associated lymphoid tissue is where it's all happening. And the gut is the largest immune organ called gut-associated lymphoid tissue and produces more antibodies than any other tissue in the body, the B and T lymphocytes. And therefore, if what we eat is wrong for the gut, it is surely wrong for our immunity. Professor Sarkis Marzmania, professor of microbiology at Caltech in California, has studied the effect of gut microbes on health for more than a decade, and he points out that the balance of different bacterial species in the gut can influence whether the immune system becomes activated or not. And the balance of the gut microbiome is critical, and we call it dysbiosis. Dysbiosis is a shift between the balance of the healthy and the unhealthy bacteria, and that is squarely responsible for literally deciding who we are, whether we are healthy or unhealthy. And it's interesting that while there are so many genes, I mean, we have so many million genes in our body, the gut microbiome also has its own set of genes, which are 150 times more genes. The gut microbiome consists of 150 times more genes that together possess 10 trillion microorganism inhabitants than that of the human genome, and thus should be considered an organ in itself. And it is this orchestra which is played between the microbiome genes and the host genes which determines our state of health. It's pretty complex, but what is changing, what is causing this imbalance is this dysbiosis, and there are two aspects to the gut. One is the microflora, and one is the membrane integrity, the intestinal permeability, which is also known as the leaky gut. Increased intestinal permeability is also called the leaky gut and can lead to inflammation and food sensitivities as we see it today. Many, many foods, many chemicals, all of these are crossing over a leaky gut and causing reactions in various ways depending on our genes, whatever we are vulnerable to. So if the inflammation is happening in the thyroid gland and the antibodies are affecting the thyroid gland, we're getting a thyroid problem. If it's happening in the joints, it's happening in form of arthritis, brain disease, depression, dementia, attention problems, you name it, and it's all happening via the leaky gut. So inflammation of the gut causing the leaky gut, and the inflammation starts with dysbiosis. We are changing, the minute we put something that these little microorganisms or bugs don't like, be it even the so-called healthy low-cal sweetener. Oh, I'm not going to have sugar, I'm going to have XYZ, the chemical. I never believed when my patient said, after a Diet Coke, our sugars go up. I said, it's not possible, 0 calories, 0 carbohydrates. This was 15 years ago. I would challenge these patients. I said, not possible, you are doing something else which is wrong, you're not checking the sugars properly, something or the other. I never believed it. Today I understand how. Because, I mean, I'm just giving you an example of a diet soda. It's not about ABC drink. It's about the fact that it's laden with chemicals. And the gut flora does not like it. And that causes inflammation, and it could increase blood sugars, and we know the researchers are supporting that. So whatever chemicals you put in, even if there are these pharmacological drugs, they don't like it. So it's very important to protect the gut from toxins by taking the precautions, by supporting the gut. If you have to give a pharmacological drug, give probiotics. Have a gut-friendly diet, gut-healing diet. Have a protocol for that. This time, I think, during the COVID time, I have seen many prescriptions coming up with probiotics. But the connections have to be made first, that how will my cough and my lungs get better if I take probiotics? Because I told a friend of mine who's a medical practitioner, I said, you know, your daughter is getting into repeated UTIs and repeated rounds of antibiotics for 1 year. Please give her probiotics. She says, no, she's taking injectables. How does it matter? That just told me that they don't get the connections. It's all the immunity is in the gut. We need to support every toxic food that we take which is not gut-friendly or microbiome-friendly needs to be supported with other strategies. So I'm not going to explain this. You understand the tight junctions. The cells, the intestinal barrier are tightly joined, and once there is a protein called zonulin, which increases the distance between the cells and causes this porosity and permeability, which can lead to right from deficiencies, from dysbiosis, deficiencies, disorders, and diseases. That's the way it flows. And, everything can be linked here. And we see that once we work on these things, we are able to also understand why widespread deficiencies of micronutrients are being experienced by people who are eating sufficient food. It's a question of malabsorption and the leaky gut. So it opens up a whole area of conversation. This is about insulin. So inflammation and insulin. Remember, these two words are the critical things that are takeaways from what my session is about. Insulin means insulin resistance. Today, metabolic syndrome and syndrome X is being understood far more than before. How do we know that we are insulin resistant? There are markers. I'm not going to go in for that. But insulin resistance itself is a state of inflammation, and we have no business to be accepting this. Big bellies, waist size of more than 80 centimeters for women and 90 centimeters for men will be associated with excessive abdominal fat and inflammation, and thereby all the other comorbidities which go with it. So that is the apple shape, as we call it, and this is a very important goal, along with maintaining the right BMI, which is less than 23. So when I say this practically, it means all the sugars and the grain-centric diet that we have, and I'll just give you a few strategies as we end the session on how to manage your diet. And this, of course, I have just mentioned to you about the life course issue, determining our immune system. So right from the nutritional status of the pregnant mother, pre-pregnancy to during pregnancy to post-pregnancy, breastfeeding and lactation, all those issues are important, and the first 1,000 days are critical for development of the innate immune system. So just 3-step formula on how to manage food on a practical level. Instead of being a grain-centric diet, which we all have, we first have the rice and the rotis. Make it protein-centric. Because in any case, grains are carbohydrate-rich, which will cause insulin resistance because of inadequate physical activity in our lifestyles today. So we don't need that kind of an approach. We need to look at our proteins. So start filling up your diet, your plate with the proteins, and pair them with vegetables. So whenever you take either dal or fish or a chicken or egg or whatever, ensure that there is some amount of vegetable with it. So proteins and the protective foods, these include all the vegetables, raw and cooked. Raw have their own advantages if your digestion permits. Things like sprouts, nuts, and fruits. Fruits, of course, are important, loaded with polyphenols and other nutrients, but being rich in sugar need to be watched. So the food, just because they are healthy, we need to be watching their sugar content, and fruit juices are an absolute no-no if the goals are to achieve optimum health, unless there are specific conditions. So dedicate one meal of the day to this group. Dedicate one meal of the day, which means you can have just a fruit breakfast with some nuts, etc. You can have just a salad lunch, salad and cooked vegetables, or just a soup and a steamed vegetable dinner. One meal predominantly can be around this. This is one very easy way I use in my practice to not only cut down calories, but to increase the nutrient quotient and the polyphenol quotient. Live foods, which means prana foods, which are sprouts. The difference between a dal and a sprout. Sprout is a live food, it has enzymes. Vegetables and fruits have live. Plus, we have the probiotic foods. Probiotic foods, there's a lot of conversation, and a lot of people end up taking dahi as a probiotic. Well, it's really not a probiotic technically by the textbook definition. unless you're buying a commercial probiotic dahi. But in general, it is more of a postbiotic, which means it has the metabolites of fermentation. So that is, fermented foods are also good for the gut. Prebiotics are also good for the gut, which are food for the gut flora. Prebiotics are fiber-rich foods and indigestible starches, which the body, the gut microbiome uses to produce good bacteria. So we need probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics. And we can get them very easily through simple things in our diets. And even pickling and these are part of our tradition, pickles, etc. The kanjis, all the fermented foods, even we have these South Indian preparations which are fermented. So they all provide the benefit of these improving gut flora. Protective foods, of course, I've already spoken a lot about them, so I'm not going to. The plan. The third P is planning and mindfulness in food. We have to apply our minds. We can't take our food for granted. We have to plan our day with meetings and our entire schedule. We also have to think of what we are carrying with us, what we are going to get, where we will be, etc., etc. So put your mind in your food. You cannot ignore this as jo mil gaya kha liya, or then, complain that I can't manage my diet. So it's very important. Sometimes writing a food diary helps you to understand where you are headed. It's a very powerful tool. So planning, not only that, planning your cereal intake. I said be protein centric, but cereals are also important. Grains are also part of our diets. So which grain you are going to have, if you're sensitive, if some grains are bothering you, you have wheat sensitivity, or you get bloated with certain grains, put them out and see. So plan your grain intake according to your requirements. Plan what time you're going to have a grain. Again, this is something which, as practitioners of nutrition, we were just told a calorie is a calorie in the morning and in the evening. Today, we know that's not true. There is a circadian rhythm, and according to that, there is a body clock, and we really must not load our systems with food beyond 7 o'clock around the sun, the way the sun works. The cycle of the sun and the body clock should be in sync with each other. So eating grains late at night is completely not the right thing to do. As an exception, yes, but not as a rule. Make these little changes. Finish your dinner or finish your grain intake at least by 7 o'clock. And whether you want to have grain once, twice, or thrice, that also can be decided. You don't need to have grains 3 times. According to one of the shlokas, they say, Ek kal bhoji is a yogi, Dvikal bhoji is a bhogi, Trikal bhoji is a bhogi, is a rogi. So basically a yogi and a bhogi, yogi, bhogi and a rogi. That means people who are eating 3 meals a day could be falling sick. So this is according to the Chakra Samhita. Also, the man who has digestive problems must not eat grain twice. I can't tell you the Sanskrit part of it, but I'm giving you the interpretation. The man who has a digestive problem must not eat grain twice. And the man who wants to have a long life must finish his grain intake by sunset. So again, in collaboration with our science. So this is all a part of planning. So plan your supplements, plan your exercise, and practice the principles of healthy eating. What are the principles of healthy eating? Eating a variety of foods, balancing, and moderation. Moderate the foods which are, which are not so desirable. Moderate your portions, and balancing is a very critical principle, which means you may not be able to manage every day the same way. If you have excessed sometimes, overeaten, then go easy the next meal. You can even fast. I can go on and on actually, now time is running out, but fasting is one of the things I must discuss here because it has come up in my conversation, that balancing and fasting, actually, this was the earlier forms of the wise practices. Just fast twice a day, twice a week. Such a beautiful way of balancing your excesses. You can do a fruit fast, you can do a vegetable and fruit fast, you can do a water fast, you can do a one meal fast, whatever works for you. The benefits of fasting today are beyond imagination. One thing which is squarely, it can only happen by the body is repairing its own cells, autophagy. One of the most powerful tools to reclaim your health, for longevity. So there is a lot of, benefits in fasting which we have not understood, and as I'm going along in my practice, I'm realizing that why, there was such an emphasis in almost all traditional, societies and religions across to fast. Whether it was the Christianity or Indians or Muslims, everywhere there is fasting as a practice. So fasting and feasting, of course, can be debatable. But fasting certainly has its benefits, and as a simple practice to boost your immunity, fasting can really help. And today intermittent fasting has come of age. So I'm going to just skip this slide. We have discussed almost everything. Useful herbs, everybody is talking about tulsi, giloi, etc., ashwagandha, and the importance of good hydration. And useful foods, even mushrooms have a very important immune boosting benefit. Just 18 grams of mushroom every day can increase the immunity by 34%, something which was quite remarkable. And if I have another minute or so, I'll just wind up. So, of course, avoid smoking, these lifestyle practices which are pro-inflammatory, limit sugar and dairy and meats, and general advice, anti-inflammatory foods, regular gargling and steaming, of course, oil pulling. Oil pulling is again a very interesting phenomena. It was a practice which was done in the South Indians, where they put virgin coconut oil in the mouth and swish it for about 10-15 minutes and spit it out. And can you imagine how smart our ancestors were? Because today, scientists have established the connection between oral flora and gut flora. So the composition of your oral flora is very, very similar to the gut flora. So you may not need to test your gut flora, you can actually... So, and what was oil pulling doing? Improving the microbes and the, the balance of the bacteria in the mouth. And what does a mouthwash do? It kills everything because it's all chemicals. It gives you a sanitized mouth, but by killing the natural flora. So oil pulling has become better understood by us. Modest exercise, yoga, meditation, prayers, and positivity, and follow, of course, all the advisories. And just the last line, that the road to building endurance and immunity is paved with a healthy gut. So with that, I will stop now and leave it. I think I've spoken a lot and tried to make it very, very comprehensive, but if there are questions and any clarifications, we'll be happy to take them on. Good question, because this question does come up very often. And if you had asked me this question at 15 years ago, I would say take a fruit any time, it doesn't matter. But today I understand the importance of this. So fruits are actually best taken empty stomach, but so not right after a meal. That is something I would say is a strict no, which a lot of people do. Right after the meal, they'll have mangoes and things like that. It's not a great idea. If after 7, you have a 3-hour gap between your last meal, no problem.
Instead of cereals, we can take fruit.
Yes, yes, yes. But don't take it on, if you've just snacked, then don't take it. Give a gap of 3 hours. Yes, if you've had your lunch at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock and a cup of tea at about 5 or 6, you can have fruits at 8 or 9, no problem.
So, बहुत बढ़िया presentation था.
the things which we were knowing but not applying, you have made them clear. So दो तीन बातें हैं सर. पहले के टाइम में हम लोग जब एग्जाम देने जाते थे तो मम्मी हमको दही खिलाती थी. I just want to know what is the significance of that custom. एक कटोरी दही या 2 चम्मच दही से हमको कितना मिलता था जो हमको हेल्दी रखता था. जैसे आज प्रोबायोटिक और प्रीबायोटिक की बात कर रहे हैं, पोस्टबायोटिक की बात कर रहे हैं, मेरे ख्याल से ये लॉजिक था कि आप घर से बाहर जा रहे हैं दही खाकर तो आपका गट का वो स्टिमुलेशन हो जाएगा.
लैक्टिक एसिड तो मिल ही रहा है ना आपको, लैक्टिक एसिड मिल रहा है, सो द पीएच ऑफ द गट विल बी फेवरेबल एंड आई एम श्योर इट विल प्रोड्यूस मेटाबोलाइट्स व्हिच विल, if the gut is happy, your brain is happy. So we have always believed that this is where the brain is, and we know it is. But today we can also say there's a second brain here, and scientists are now calling the gut the second brain. If there is one transmission happening from the brain to the gut, there are 8 signals going from the gut to the brain. All the 80% of this serotonin is being secreted in the gut. The dopamine, the tryptophan, sorry? No, so basically what I'm saying is the happiness hormones, they are here. Only 5% melatonin. We believed melatonin was secreted by the pineal gland, but it's only 4 or 5% which is coming from there. The rest is in the gut. So if somebody has a gut problem and is having a sleep problem today, all your patients who are complaining of sleep problems focus on the gut. So, and I am doing this in clinical practice. So I'm sure that he did something favorable to the gut which made the connection between better concentration, better performance, etc., etc.
So, आपने गेहूं की बात की सर.
जी.
हमारे एंसेस्टर्स तो गेहूं खाते थे. क्या गेहूं में जो आजकल पेस्टिसाइड आ रहा है वो ज्यादा नुकसान कर रहा है या wheat itself is making harm? Number 1 point. That is very important.
जी.
दूसरा सर जो हमारे एंसेस्टर्स की डाइट पैटर्न था जो आज आपने बताया सर, सर्दियों में बाजरे की रोटी खाते थे, गर्मी में सत्तू पीते थे, मिक्स डाइट, वेरी डाइट, वो ज्यादा यूजफुल थी जिसको आज हम फॉरगेट कर गए कि सब पिज्जा पास्ता और जंक फूड में चले गए. तो इन दोनों के बीच में बैलेंस कैसे बनाया जाएगा?
जी. Got your questions, and they are very good questions which will help put a perspective to what I said about wheat sensitivity. So wheat itself is among the 8 allergens that we know. I'm sure you all know the 8 allergens. Eggs, soya, milk, and shellfish, nuts, and tree nuts, and wheat. So it is one of these 8 allergens which are known to trigger immune problems in certain people. So it has an immunogenic component by its very nature. Rice के साथ ऐसा नहीं है. कभी rice का नहीं ऐसे होता ना. So इसी तरह, so it has something. Now the wheat which was given to us before 1960 was a different breed of wheat. It has gone through many, many evolutions, from the einkorn wheat, the hexaploid, the diploid, पहले diploid थी, अब hexaploid है. So all those changes have happened in the wheat, but they were not really bothering people. However, I'll love to explain this in detail. Actually, the wheat protein, gluten, bothers every human being by damaging the gut lining, but most human beings are able to repair it. So there is a transient leak all the time, and that gets repaired in healthy individuals. So if I'm not wrong in saying no human actually digests and the gluten and the gliadin proteins completely. They get broken down only partially. But there is no damage to health in most people. But this protein has an immunogenic component, we know that. Now what happened in the 60s? For the Green Revolution's sake, high-yielding varieties of wheat were produced. Phenotypically, the wheat plant, which was a tall grass, became a dwarf. Many, many seeds, much more productive. But two aspects which are of significance to us happened. There was a DNA change, of course, so we don't call it a GM wheat, we call it a composite variety or a trans variety. But whatever it is, some change happened. So imagine if in an immunogenic protein or a plant, more changes are happening, safety trials were not done on what is happening to the population. So it was just introduced as is. And one of the other traits which they wanted to acquire by this process of changing was its ability to withstand pesticides. So it was a herbicide, weedicide resistant grain. Now what does that mean? Typically glyphosate is used as a fungicide for prevention of spoilage. And it is used fairly rampantly in other plants as well. But whenever it is used, it also damages the plant. So it has to be used very judiciously. Now, one of the traits which was engineered through this process was weedicide resistance. So, to your point, is it the pesticides? Yes, so the farmers were able to put loads of it without damaging the plant. So it was a twin issue. Both issues became important. There was a chromosomal change, and then there was a increased application of the pesticide. So perhaps both those things started, impacting people in a certain way. You can see post-60s, 80s, the 1980s and 90s saw the epidemic of heart disease, epidemic of obesity started growing, even in India, in the Western country. And this wheat was the new modern wheat. In fact, the farmer whose farm was used to grow the first variety of this change wheat is a patient of mine, and he's suffering miserably with health problems. And he gave me the whole gyan on the fact that how the government actually disallowed local desi wheat from being given in ration shops, and only imported American wheat, which was the same variety, was being allowed to use in the ration shops. So somewhere these changes happened in the food supply. So mothers, now I told you something about placental crossovers. Why I brought this up was, these antibodies, if the mother is making antibodies, it's immunogenic to the mother, and if she's making antibodies against this protein, these are crossing over the placenta and being given to the baby even before birth. Now you can join the dots. Why we are seeing an epidemic, again I'm using the word epidemic literally because this is going to become autoimmune problems, and autism, a neurodevelopmental disorder, is becoming grave, it's scary. The rates are so scary. Why these kids are having problems? What wrong? There is no lack of awareness. Women, they're eating better. We have much better medical care, much better facilities. Autism has gone up from 1 in 10,000 20 years ago to 1 in 59. And it is dropping. According to the projections, it is going to be 1 in 40 in the next few years. Something which was unheard of. Who knew autism? It didn't even exist. And the diet, which is recommended for autistic children, of course it is not being used by medical practitioners, is a gluten-free, casein-free diet. It's called a GFCF diet. And I know, because I'm treating patients with autistic, spectrum disorders, and they are not being given diet. These patients are coming directly to me. The doctors are not, only a few are recognizing this importance. And I have this one child, I'll tell you, if time is permitting. The other session. So I'll just, this question was very important, so I'm taking this time to answer. So he had a head banging tendency. He was on medication. He was about 12 years old, banging his head every day for 4 hours, minimum. He had sores on his head and he wouldn't stop. And we changed his diet, and every day, within a month, head banging went from 4 hours, 3 hours, 2 hours to nothing. And then the parents were very happy following the diet, all that corrected. Till one day in school, the child was given a regular muffin by mistake by the teacher. We rolled back again. 2 months it took us again to get the gut flora back and to correct it. So these are little things that I'm trying to tell you, that these dots have to be joined. And what to do for junk food and to protect yourself from these processed foods is the idea of balance. If you can make these foods at home with healthier ingredients, nothing like it, and make informed choices, regulate it. Occasional indulgence is not going to be a problem. If you subsist on it, it's a problem. If it's a regular part of your food, it's a problem. So, and if you have it once in a while, then do a balancing act and, go easy on the next meal, have enough vegetables and fruits, and that's a very common sense approach. So with that. I will talk to you if I can before I leave, then I'll be leaving. I'll share my contact information and you can. No, we've had a rather long session.